President Trump has now fired his top officials handling immigration and the Epstein debacle. It's a clear sign that Trump sees his administration's failures in these big areas. Now, Washington is still absorbing Trump's firing of Attorney General Bondi yesterday.
Let me take you through the specific documented real-world foundation of the intense congressional scrutiny and accountability pressure surrounding former President Donald Trump's post-election conduct, particularly as illuminated by the actions and cooperation of his former White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows. The documented real-world elements here are far more alarming than any fictional congressional crisis scenario precisely because they involve actual immunity cooperation, actual contempt referrals, and actual criminal referrals from the most formally credible available institutional sources in the most formally authenticated and the most credibly sourced available accountability record. The House of Representatives voted 222 to 208 to hold Mark Meadows in criminal contempt of Congress in December 2021, with 2 Republicans joining Democrats in what stands as one of the most formally available bipartisan accountability actions documented across major outlets including PBS, Reuters, and others. ABC News specifically reported that Meadows was granted immunity and spoke multiple times to special counsel Jack Smith's team, providing information under oath about Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. Separately, the January 6th Select Committee formally referred Trump to the Justice Department for potential charges, including obstruction of an official proceeding and conspiracy to defraud the United States, while also targeting Meadows for contempt proceedings. This combination of formal immunity cooperation with the most senior available federal prosecutor, a formal House contempt referral with 2 Republican crossovers, and congressional criminal referrals for Trump himself on serious charges like obstruction and conspiracy represents the most specifically alarming available real-world institutional accountability convergence in the most formally documented and the most credibly sourced available record. It is not a fictional congressional crisis, but rather actual documented formal institutional accountability actions from the most senior available congressional and prosecutorial sources in the most formally authenticated available accountability record. Meadows, as Trump's former White House Chief of Staff, was the most uniquely positioned available witness because he was the most intimately available insider to the most consequential available post-election conduct, making his immunity cooperation the most specifically alarming available accountability development in the most formally documented available election subversion accountability record. Before diving deeper, let's acknowledge a broader point. Trust in mainstream media has eroded for many people, which is why independent voices and platforms focused on raw context without heavy corporate framing have gained traction. That said, the core facts here rest on official votes, committee actions, and reporting from established outlets citing sources familiar with the proceedings. Staying informed means cross-referencing primary records like House resolutions and committee referrals alongside journalistic accounts. What we are examining is a series of interconnected developments that paint a picture of significant insider access and institutional pressure. Meadows served as White House Chief of Staff through the critical post-election period in late 2020 and early 2021. This included involvement around the Georgia phone call where Trump urged officials to find 11,780 votes, planning related to the January 6th rally, pressure campaigns on state officials and legislatures, and events surrounding the Capitol attack itself. The Chief of Staff role, by its nature, provides comprehensive access to presidential decision-making processes, communications, meetings, and internal discussions. This positioning made Meadows one of the most intimately placed individuals to observe and document the private versus public aspects of Trump's post-election strategy. ABC News reported that Meadows received immunity from special counsel Jack Smith's team and testified multiple times, including before a grand jury, about these matters. Sources indicated Meadows informed investigators that he had repeatedly warned Trump that claims of widespread election fraud were not supported by evidence. This cooperation occurred after an initial phase where Meadows had provided some materials, such as text messages, to the January 6th committee before partially pulling back, leading to the contempt proceedings. The shift from partial cooperation to facing contempt charges, followed by an immunity grant in the federal probe, highlights a dynamic where legal exposure prompted a structured path to testimony. Immunity in this context means the information provided could not be used directly against Meadows in federal prosecution, allowing prosecutors to gain detailed insider perspectives without immediate self-incrimination risks for the witness. This roadmap aspect of Meadows' potential testimony is particularly noteworthy. A former chief of staff offering details on texts, memos, phone calls, meetings, and internal conversations about post-election efforts provides prosecutors with a comprehensive documentary and testimonial framework. Rather than relying solely on external observations or public statements, such testimony can connect private intentions expressed in the White House to publicly documented actions like rallies, calls to state officials, and alternate elector strategies. The alarming evidentiary feature here lies in how it potentially bridges the gap between what was said behind closed doors and what unfolded in the open, creating a more direct chain of evidence in any accountability proceedings. The initial cooperation followed by pullback before immunity also serves as a behavioral signal. Media accounts describe Meadows handing over certain texts early on, then resisting further compliance, which contributed to the House vote holding him in contempt. This pattern suggests an internal calculation of personal legal vulnerability, where the need for immunity became necessary to navigate potential exposure. When an insider with such proximity initially engages but then hesitates, it can indicate the sensitivity of the underlying materials and discussions. The subsequent immunity arrangement resolved that tension, enabling testimony that federal investigators deemed valuable enough to secure through legal protections. Now let's examine three key analytical dimensions of this story in detail. First, the historical parallel to the Watergate era and John Dean's testimony. In the Nixon administration, White House counsel John Dean provided insider testimony about the president's personal involvement in the cover-up of the Watergate break-in. Dean's intimate access to sensitive legal and strategic discussions helped shift the political landscape, moving accountability from a defensible position to one where survival became untenable for the administration. The parallel with Meadows is not exact but analytically resonant. Both individuals held roles with deep access to the president's most private deliberations, Meadows as chief of staff with oversight of operations, scheduling, and communications. Dean's testimony transformed the narrative around presidential knowledge and direction. Similarly, Meadows' cooperation under immunity could offer a structured account of Trump's awareness and decision-making on election-related matters. This framework helps contextualize how insider testimony from a top aide can reshape public and institutional perceptions of accountability, drawing from documented historical precedent where such cooperation accelerated scrutiny. Second, consider the bipartisan accountability pressure. The House vote on contempt for Meadows was 222-208, with two Republicans, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, joining Democrats. This was not a unanimous party line action but included notable crossovers, signaling that even within Republican ranks, there was recognition of the seriousness of defying a congressional subpoena in an investigation into the January 6th events. The January 6th Select Committee, which included those two Republicans, went further by issuing formal criminal referrals for Trump. These referrals encompass charges such as obstruction of an official proceeding related to the Electoral College certification and conspiracy to defraud the United States, involving alleged schemes to undermine the election outcome. The committee also highlighted other potential violations, including conspiracy to make false statements and incitement or assistance related to the Capitol events. The dual focus, contempt for Meadows and criminal referrals for Trump, created a layered congressional architecture addressing both the principal figure and a key aide. This combination crossed a threshold where institutional actions reflected cross-party elements, even if limited in assessing election subversion concerns. Official records from Congress.gov and coverage in outlets like PBS and NBC documented the vote and referrals as formal steps, not mere rhetoric. Third, the broader pattern of inner-circle cooperation or flipping. Beyond Meadows, other Trump associates provided testimony or materials. Cassidy Hutchinson, a former aide to Meadows, offered voluntary and detailed testimony to the January 6th committee. In her accounts, Hutchinson described conversations where Meadows relayed that Trump had pretty much acknowledged he lost the election but wanted to continue fighting to overturn the results. She recounted Meadows telling her on November 18, 2020, that Trump knew it was over in some sense, yet pursued avenues to challenge the outcome. This independent corroboration strengthens the evidentiary picture by providing multiple insider perspectives on the same core dynamic. private acknowledgement of loss juxtaposed with sustained public and operational efforts to reverse it. Other associates, through depositions or public statements, contributed to a pattern where loyalty appeared to fracture under legal and investigative pressure. When a president's former chief of staff secures immunity to testify, a top aide testifies voluntarily about key admissions, and multiple others engage with investigators, it signals potential erosion in the traditional inner circle insulation. This dynamic becomes especially relevant in evaluating long-term accountability trajectories, including in any ongoing or future proceedings. A particularly concrete element involves the Georgia call on January 2, 2021. Trump, joined by Meadows and others, spoke with Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. The recorded conversation included Trump stating he wanted to find 11,180 votes, which aligned with the margin needed to flip the state's results. Meadows played an operational role in helping arrange and facilitate aspects of the outreach to Georgia officials, including texts and calls leading up to the discussion. This moment is documented through the audio recording itself, released publicly and referenced in legal proceedings, including Georgia's state-level election interference case where Trump and Meadows faced charges, though outcomes varied by jurisdiction and timing. Meadows' insider knowledge of the planning, combined with his later federal testimony under immunity about Trump's private statements and warnings regarding fraud claims, creates a dual layer: operational facilitation plus testimonial insight into intent and knowledge. This combination is operationally significant because it ties a specific high-profile incident to broader patterns of pressure on state officials. Hutchinson's testimony adds independent weight here. By describing Meadows informing her of Trump's private sense that the election was lost while efforts continued, she corroborates a key gap between internal realizations and external actions. Two witnesses from the same orbit describing consistent dynamics around private loss acknowledgement and continued overturn attempts builds a multi-source foundation. Prosecutorial standards often value such corroboration, as it reduces reliance on any single account and strengthens chains of evidence regarding knowledge, intent, and coordination, bringing this together into clear, concrete takeaways. First, the ABC News reporting on Meadows' immunity and multiple sessions with Jack Smith's team, paired with the documented 222-208 House contempt vote, including Republican crossovers, establishes a notable insider accountability convergence. It confirms that a senior Trump aide with unparalleled post-election proximity provided testimony to federal prosecutors in the election-related probe. The bipartisan element in the contempt vote, however narrow, adds a layer of institutional validation beyond pure partisanship. Second, the January 6 committee's criminal referrals for Trump on obstruction and conspiracy to defraud, alongside separate contempt targeting for Meadows, form a comprehensive congressional referral framework. This dual approach addressed both the central figure and his top staffer, marking one of the most detailed formal congressional actions in modern presidential scrutiny. The referrals were not binding prosecutions but served as a formal roadmap urging the Justice Department to investigate specific statutes tied to efforts to disrupt the electoral process. Third, the Nixon-Watergate parallel through John Dean offers a historical lens. Dean's testimony as counsel with intimate access helped unravel layers of presidential involvement in a cover-up. Meadows, as chief of staff with similar comprehensive access to Trump's post-election deliberations, provides an analogous potential for insight. While historical parallels are never identical, the intimate access character in both cases underscores how top aides' cooperation can accelerate accountability examinations, shifting landscapes from denial or deflection to detailed evidentiary review. Fourth, developments to monitor include any prosecutorial use of Meadows' testimony in federal or state cases, follow-up on congressional referrals by the Department of Justice, incorporation of Georgia call details in relevant proceedings, and signals of further insider cooperation. These elements could indicate whether the documented testimony translates into tangible legal or political outcomes or remains contained through procedural strategies. At the bottom line, the House's 222-208 contempt vote for Meadows is formally documented in congressional records. ABC News and related reporting confirmed the immunity grant and testimony to Smith's team regarding election overturn efforts. Meadows initially provided some text before resistance led to contempt, followed by immunity. The January 6 committee issued referrals for Trump on obstruction of an official proceeding and conspiracy to defraud the United States. Hutchinson corroborated aspects of private acknowledgement of loss amid continued challenges. Meadows' role in the Georgia outreach provides operational context. The Watergate parallel frames the potential impact of chief of staff level cooperation. Collectively, these documented threads represent a significant chapter in American presidential accountability history. They illustrate what it means for the most intimately positioned White House chief of staff to engage with federal prosecutors about fundamental questions of post-election conduct, private knowledge, and public actions. The convergence of congressional votes, committee referrals, immunity arrangements, and corroborative testimony creates a record that warrants close attention as legal and political processes unfold. Whether these elements ultimately produce criminal accountability outcomes, influence public perception, or are managed through case strategies and protections remains a matter of ongoing development and debate. The interplay of formal institutional actions with insider insights highlights tensions in how democratic systems process challenges to electoral integrity. What stands clear from the record is the depth of access Meadows held and the institutional responses that followed. Observers will continue tracking how these documented foundations shape future proceedings, with questions lingering about the balance between insider cooperation and thresholds for consequential action. The story underscores the weight of proximity and power and the mechanisms designed to examine it when stakes involve the peaceful transfer of authority.